I did the Legalize
Is that too high?
No, I could adjust anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Hugo. Mon nom est Jean Conroy. De Montréal.
Just kidding. English. It doesn't translate well.
Well, I asked you to go last. And the problem, of course, is you then listen to all these great speeches and all these ideas and all these things. And every time you hear something, you think, oh, boy, there's another thing. So I spoke last night a little bit, and I'll repeat that in a minute. But just before doing so, I thought, being a lawyer, having been involved in this whole issue for so many years, a little update on where things are at, strictly speaking, in the law right now. Continues to be illegal to possess cannabis under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. The Conservative government did bring in mandatory minimum penalties for production and trafficking, possession for the purpose of trafficking. We haven't seen a case come into the courts yet that we could raise a challenge, so we think that they realize most of the cases where they busted people since November, they realize that if they go forward with them, there's going to be a challenge and they're probably going to lose. So it's interesting, especially because some of them are medical sort of related in one way or another. So we've yet to see them prosecute, at least that I've heard of, anybody under the mandatory minimums. As we try to tell most of our clients, if you're going to break the law, try to only break one law at a time. The biggest problem, of course, is that the smell of marijuana is your Achilles heel. And many of you smoke in your cars or pack it around with you in your cars, and unfortunately the law continues to be, and I just finished a case in the Court of Appeal a few weeks ago, that it depends on the circumstances of every case. And so what police officers do when they pick up a smell of burnt marijuana, they immediately arrest you for possession. If they arrest you for possession, they can search your car. And that's what you don't want to happen. If you're packing around fresh or veg marijuana, they say, well, that's even worse. That means the drug must be there. It wasn't consumed and has gone and disappeared. And they'll arrest you for possession so that they can get into the vehicle. We had something like 60,000 arrests over the last several years, per year, for simple possession. Charges and arrests, not convictions. Because once they get in the car, they find all that additional marijuana, and they charge possession for the purpose of trafficking. So the statistics are a bit skewed, but a lot of Canadians' liberties are still being interfered with in 2013 on a virtually daily basis for possession of marijuana, as the way to stop them, as the way to get into their cars, as the way to at least cause them some problem. And people get all happy when they get a stay of proceedings, which is a dropping of the charge. But that stay of proceedings will be there on your CPIC printout. It'll be there in that police database. And the police databases nowadays are extremely broad. And so it continues to be a major problem. A stay, a withdrawal, are prejudicial, even though you aren't convicted of anything. So that's the scene that continues to exist in a nutshell. We have 35,000 people now who are authorized to possess marijuana for medical purposes. 27,000 of them have personal production licenses for themselves. It's only about 6,000, I think, who are designated growers. And the great majority are indoor. Well, very few are indoor-outdoor. That's allowed under the current regs. The new regs, which actually are in force already, June 19th they came in, but there's something going on whereby you still can't do everything under them, and Health Canada's, it's a little unclear, but they're both in place and they're supposed to run together until March 31st. The end of September is a key date in terms of not being able to apply or renew or modify your existing license. But March 31st, the current law under the MMPR, the Marijuana for Medical Purposes regulation, is that you'll lose your right to produce. All of the designated growers will lose their licenses as well, and you will only be able to access cannabis through licensed producers. Now, overall, and I think Riel mentioned this is a good thing. If you look at the big picture, you say, okay, Canada will have licensed producers of cannabis. It's no longer just the government having a contract with Prairie Plant System. It's now legislation that allows anyone, and I'll tell you what the limits are in a minute, allows anyone to essentially apply to become a licensed producer. And it talks about brands and strains and importing and exporting. I grew up in Malawi, so I'm going to contact the tobacco farmers I know down there, get them to switch to Malawi Gold and be an importer of Malawi Gold. So, anyway, it's a good thing. Canada will have licensed producers. The problem, of course, is you have to first go through a security clearance, and as I mentioned, the databases. If you have associated with anyone who may have diverted into the black market, it's going to come up. This is not, you know, a criminal record check in have you been convicted of an offense within the last 10 years. It's more than just a police information check, which, by the way, is what you sign when you go for a criminal record check. And you should never sign those things to let them go that broadly. But this is going to be a high security clearance type check that you have to go through in terms of the federal government, and it's going to be, I think, fairly difficult for many people to do it. The people in charge of the production, the four top people all have to have these security clearances, and if you're a corporation, all the officers and directors have to have them. We don't talk about the employees, so it may well be that people, as long as your front people, your top people are clear, you can have others who actually have some experience in this involved. But anyway, that remains to be seen. You have to announce to the RCMP, to the fire chief, and to the local government what you're going to do and where you're going to do it. And of course, this has led to a wide variety of different things going on in various different municipalities. Mission, where I live, has said nothing within the corners of the District of Mission unless you make a specific application and it's site-specific. Originally they were saying agricultural. I was saying what Brian was talking about earlier, light manufacturing, light industrial is really what. So there's all this zoning and all these things that are impacted at the local level that are going on as well. And hopefully, but unlikely, it'll be all sorted out by March 31st of 2014. Chances are there'll be chaos. And lots of people will continue to grow. If they get busted and it's genuine medical and they got the support of their doctors, Crown's going to have a hard time proving a charge and sending them up for 6 months, mandatory minimum, if they're growing more than 6 plants. And up it goes to 200 to 500 plants. So it's going to be interesting to see what shakes out there. And my hope and guess is that the government will see that A, they will not have enough licensed producers in place by March 31st, and the market will not be supplied, and so they will have to extend things. We are going to start a lawsuit, I hope to file before the end of this month, to do with the gaps in the new legislation. And the major gap, of course, is the repeal of the personal production licenses, and we say a specific designated grower, caregiver type of a person who stands in the shoes of, say, somebody in a wheelchair who can't grow for themselves, but who also isn't going to be able to afford $8 to $10 a gram, which is the estimated licensed producing price. which is the current market price, or has been a current market price for some period. My understanding is compassion clubs, dispensaries, even black market, it's $7 to $12, so 8 to 10 is in the middle there. And all kinds of people for the last 10 years, 13 years now I guess almost, have built their own grows in their own basements, spent a pile of money doing that. Hopefully most of them have complied with bylaws so they're safe and so on and so forth. And there haven't been a huge number of fires in medical grows, no matter what you hear from the Surrey fire chief. And so we've got people who've learned how to grow their own, control their strains, particularly depending upon their illnesses, what works for them and so on, and feel safe and secure, and they have been able to do it for $1 to $4 a gram. And they cannot afford $8 to $10 a gram. There have been studies done through CAMCD. Zachary Walsh, I think his name was, from UBC. We know that 60 to 70% of the patients are on disability pensions. They cannot afford $8 to $10 a gram. And they're concerned about somebody else growing for them. And they're going to lose, of course, their investment. And the whole, interesting, I've got over 3,000 victim impact statements of patients who want to participate in the lawsuit or give evidence, and they're just mind-blowing. Incredible. You wouldn't believe how this is going to really impact something. So it's a big thing. And so they are, hopefully, we're going to file, and we'll see what the government does, and hopefully we'll get a communication that there will be a delay. If we'll be hoping by November to seek some sort of injunction to try and maintain the status quo until there's a decision by the court. Because we'll be basically asking for this: a declaration that the new regulations are unconstitutional to the extent that they take away that personal production license, which was part of the original Parker judgment. It included a right to produce, and including in that the DG, the limited DG caregiver. Also, the new regs don't allow growing in a dwelling house. As I said, many of the people are growing in a dwelling house, and if it's done properly, it's perfectly safe. Again, nothing except dried marijuana. You can't. So they've limited it again to dried marijuana, notwithstanding the Smith case, which in BC, and it's on its way up slowly, has said no extracts, nothing except dried marijuana, but Smith says you can in BC. So BC, because the courts in BC are only binding in BC, that's the reason for that. So we're going to include, in our case, seek a declaration, because we're going to go to federal court. And we're going to challenge all those things too. Another one was no outdoor. And yet some of the victim impact statements talk about the support from their physicians in terms of growing outdoors and the therapeutic effect and so on. So it's really quite interesting. And we think we've got a whole range now of patients that cover all these areas. And so hopefully we'll file. Hopefully they'll be reasonable. I don't have my hopes up after years of experience. But hopefully they'll see that there's going to be a real problem in March if they don't sort this out.
Where's the funding at for that?
Well, we have the Coalition Against Repeal. That's a website. And it has, we've raised about 35,000. We need a huge pile more, not just for lawyers' fees, but we're going to try to get all these people from across the country into a courtroom. And so we're going to have to do this with Skype and video and so on. Many patients presumably won't even be able to travel to wherever we... And federal court can sit anywhere across the country. So it's going to be a bit novel if this comes to trial. But even before trial, people are going to be examined for discovery, as we call it. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that using modern technology as a way to cut down what the normal expenses would be to try and get everybody into a courtroom to have them examined and cross-examined and give evidence and so on. I'm pretty confident that as a result of Parker, Itzig, Krieger, Grant, and Murnaugh recently, even though it was overturned in the Court of Appeal. The right is once your doctor or medical person approves you, you have a constitutional right of reasonable access. I think the cases support that it means a safe, continuous supply. And it included the right to produce originally, and the courts, even the Ontario Court of Appeal said that in Parker. So the whole business of, as it transgressed over the years, where I think by the time of Hitzig there was prairie plant, but people weren't using it. So, you know, Parker had to go and grow his own because he couldn't afford the black market. These patients are going to continue to grow their own because they can't afford the black market or the government supply. And so that will be our position.
Would that include the ones that their license have, it's like they were licensed, they are in a court case now, but they didn't get relicensed in time?
Yeah, well, our hope would be to represent, it'll be what we call a representative action. We take the best people we can find to represent those issues, to represent not only themselves, but the entire class of people that had licenses, that have lost them or and are going to lose them.
So
and then if we lose that, the follow-up to that would be a class action for damages, for the damages suffered by them having lost their licenses and the investment that they made in their homes or grows and so on and so forth, which we probably have to wait to do after, which instead of trying to do it. So that's sort of what's going on in the medical and what's going on now in terms of the law as it exists at the moment. So, as I said last night, excuse me, we're in a very important time. We had Washington State and Colorado turn the corner and create this sort of resurgence, for us old guys anyway. Some of us have come up to the brink 4 or 5 times and it hasn't happened. We became cynical, but again, these things happen and we get our hopes up and it looks like we're on a roll again. Not only Washington and Colorado, but there's 20 medical states now in the US that are legal. There are many other states looking at the Washington and Colorado situations and wanting to follow. We've got Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the US, about 2 or 3 weeks ago coming out and dropping the hint about reversing the war on drugs. Big statement. Then we had Sanjay Gupta come out on CNN, a guy who was opposed to marijuana and used his show in that way to say he was wrong. And if you see the YouTube warm-ups or the sort of promos, they're even better than the Sunday show, where he actually apologizes and says how wrong he was and how hypocritical the government is and so on. And so it's really just excellent stuff. And then when you see the show itself, the young woman with the epilepsy or the constant seizures going from about 300 a week down to a couple a month, the gentleman who can speak well, and how it would impact his speech, and boom, he could speak normally after just a couple of puffs. I've actually seen this in courtrooms with patients on the stand, and it's really quite an impact. So, huge. A guy like that, CNN, the extent that he can reach in terms of getting this message across, we were wrong, we apologize, and relating it, showing the medical benefits, is huge. And then, a couple of days ago, Holder again, or his office, instructed all the U.S. attorneys essentially to stop interfering with Colorado and Washington State, let them do what they're trying to do, we'll just monitor it, and see if they're able to contain it within their states, I think was one of the parts of the speech. And so that is huge, because again, there's these 20 other states lining up. There's the rest of the world looking. Paraguay, I think, was the recent one. We've got Uruguay, sorry, that's right. Uruguay. I mean, Portugal's essentially been this way for some time. And so, you know, we've got these other parts of the world where they knew that the drugs market is the US of A, and the statement that was always coming out of the US of A is now changing, that it's sort of a domino effect that hopefully will continue. So with all that happening in the rest of the world, what's happening in Canada? Well, Justin Trudeau, I think it was Brian again, or somebody else talked about politicians, yeah, I think Brian, and how you can't get politicians to take a position. Well, that's been the case for years, and there's the odd one who's talked decrim over the years, but he has been willing to use the word legalization. That's huge in my books too, because it means we actually have a politician who has the guts to use the word and to stand up and say that's what we want. Not some half-baked measure, not some incremental step anymore, but actual legalization. And I'm impressed because he, and I think the Women's Alliance deserves some credit, he is using that, you know, what they always say, oh, what about the kids? What about the children and the message you're sending to the children and all this stuff, you know, we've heard it forever. And he's managed to educate himself enough to know, to be able to say, listen, they know where to get it in a black market. It's easy to get in a black market, you know, it's out of control. When you legalize, you regulate, you bring it under control. As I like to say, you need to corrupt an adult to get at it, at least in the Liquor Control Board model. So I think that's big. I have supported the NDP in the past. I was even a member of the Marijuana Party. I'm not a member of any political party at the moment, but certainly speaking for myself, I intend to support the Liberal Party because they are the only party that is saying that they will legalize if they come to power. We've got 2.5 years to get there, 2015.
Mulcair just said something yesterday in Nanaimo.
What?
I'm going to quote, I'm just reading this right now.
Okay.
It was
Well, I've been waiting for him to come around and start saying another study.
I'm just reading this
you last say after.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to just read you one, because you're talking about Mulcair as a...
Fine, but you got to remember that we, in this country, over the last several elections, people didn't vote, and so these conservatives got in. And they also split what we call the left vote. And that's the Liberals and the NDP. And so it is strategic voting. It is holding your nose and voting to try and not split the vote and making sure that people get out and vote. You know? Get out and vote and vote. I at the moment say for the Liberal Party. I'm not saying we'll change. I'm saying they are the only party that has clearly said we will legalize. The Conservatives have said mandatory minimums. Do I look like a guy who smokes marijuana? Wasn't that Harper's?
Speak to the camera, John, and keep it short.
Oh, sorry. All right, well, then let me get to the point. We need $10,000 a month in order to run the operating expenses of the National Organization for the Reform of the Marijuana Laws with an office in Ottawa that at the moment I've had a quote of $2,500 a month on an old embassy that's in a strategic location that would be able to house Normal Canada, the Normal Women's Alliance, the Drug Policy Foundation, these groups that have this common legalized marijuana issue in common. There's places for people to stay and the whole situation. So $2,500 for a place, another $2,500 to have somebody, the basic paper and pens and operating expense type of stuff, and hopefully an assistant of some sort, an executive director, up to 5,000 probably, so that takes you up to your 10. You know, any combination of those. So we're saying that's probably what it would cost to run an office in Ottawa, sharing it with as many people who have the same goal as possible in order to run this campaign, supporting all the political parties who come out for legalization, all of them. But, and then, you know, try to make the strategic vote at the end. But that's what we're going to have to do, and we're going to have to, that's why I say through the 420s, through all these other things that we put on, we have to get people to raise money.
John?
If the 35,000 people who are got ATPs, authorizations to possess, each kicked in $5, we would have a good start. Sure, I'm asking Bob to make a commitment in terms of this, but I do think there are all sorts of others who need to step up to the plate and kick in, not just Bob.
My fast question is, you mentioned 3 groups, Alliance and Drug and Normal and that. How much do they already generated annually from their own fundraising activities that they'll be able to contribute, each of those 3 organizations, towards that $10,000 a month?
Well, unfortunately, it's the old chicken and egg thing,
Oh,
because if you have an
normally,
executive
Could we make a
director
budget?
who's in there and then working full-time on that, they become the person who is not only getting the message out, but is getting the funds raised.
Yeah, can we make a budget for that? I'd like to propose to create some sort of a budget
Yeah,
for fundraising and the overhead and,
well, as I was saying, if we have an executive director, we have a place, we have the groups sharing the
Well, there's
space,
fundraising ongoing
and the
already.
focus
Yeah.
is,
So how much are they making annually that they could contribute?
I think our budget, Bob, was $1,000 a month.
Keith,
So they're out of the $2,500 a month, normal ladies could contribute $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
And then the Drug Alliance or whatever coalition, how much do they?
Jillian, I don't, again, she's gone unfortunately, but
Okay, but they have a budget
But we don't know
probably
that they wanna be
comparable
outside.
to this? So maybe just between the 3 groups banded together, it sounds like you got your $2,500 a month for.
well, I mean, you
And then
know,
we're looking for at least some funding of comparable
Of
amount.
overhead, yeah.
it may be, we're just putting out that figure and saying if we had 10 grand a month from as many sources as possible,
Yeah.
we think we could have an office in Ottawa, in the capital, during this 2-year run-up to the election, in order to try and convince whoever's prepared to stand up and legalize cannabis and get it out of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. In 2016 in New York, there's a UN drug summit that follows that. So with all these things going on in the
Emergency
US,
session.
with Sensible BC going on in BC, and hopefully pushing that further across the country, these 2.5 years are critical and a great opportunity for us to try to do it again.
There.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. I am not a politician, I'm a lawyer. And there's a difference.